Welcome to our Bible study for this week. We are continuing with our Cumberland Presbyterian Confession of Faith, continuing in the fourth section today. And I want to begin with a movie clip that I bet you will recognize.
Do you suppose we'll meet any wild animals?
We might. Animals that eat straw? Some, but mostly lions and tigers and bears.
Lions?
And tigers? And bears.
Lions and tigers and bears. Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Oh, my.
Lions and tigers and bears.
Our lesson writer titled this lesson, Justification and Regeneration and Sanctification. Oh my! Because those words may sound a little bit intimidating, kind of like lions and tigers and bears. They are big 25-cent theological words, but they're really important for us to understand what God does in and through us, and for us to understand Cumberland Presbyterian theology. And so today we're going to look at justification, regeneration, and sanctification. And let's begin with justification. 4.12 says, justification is God's act of loving acceptance of believers, whereby persons are reconciled to Him by the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. When they in repentance and faith trust Christ, who is their righteousness, God gives them peace and restores their relationship with them. So when I hear the word justification, the first thing I think about is when I'm working on the computer on a word processor and Microsoft Word. If I hit Control L, it brings everything to the left and everything is justified and all lines up right on the left. And that's kind of what justification is for us too, where God takes everything and lines everything up just like it is supposed to be. We are restored, as it says, in our relationship to Him. Everything is put right where it needs to be. Justification also sometimes is used in a legal sense, and we talked recently about the penal substitutionary atonement and its limits. When we see the justification that God does for us purely in legal terms, it kind of falls apart a little bit. And so let's play with that just a bit. If I get a speeding ticket, and I guess I should brag, and this will probably be inviting this to happen to me, I have never gotten a ticket in my life. I've just been lucky, my wife says, and not righteous, but I've never gotten a ticket. But if I were to get a ticket, I would have to pay the fine, and there would be points that would come on to my license, and that would probably drive up my insurance. And then after a period of time, the points would go away, and the insurance would go back down, and everything was now justified, right? Everything is back to the way it once was, and I had paid the price for my crime, and now that crime is essentially gone. It's off of my record, and there are no consequences for it, and that kind of thing. Well, that's being justified in a legal sense. But let's look for a moment again at that first sentence in our confession. Justification is God's act of loving acceptance of believers, whereby persons are reconciled to Him. Now, if I go before the judge because I have a speeding ticket or have committed some other crime, I do not go before the judge expecting loving acceptance. As a matter of fact, if the judge already lovingly accepts me, he or she ought to recuse themselves if they know me, if they love me, because they're not going to be able to be impartial and be able to impart justice in an impartial manner. And yet here we're told in our confession that justification isn't legal. It is not like going before a judge, God the judge, although God is our judge, but it is going before God who acts with loving acceptance. And supposing, though, I do go before this judge, and I do pay my fine, and I do wait the time out until the points come off the license and the insurance goes down and all is kind of justified, I would not say that now I am reconciled in my relationship to the judge. There never should have been a relationship in the first place. And so this whole sentence makes no sense in terms of the legal justice system, in terms of the penal system. And yet it is what justification is all about. It is all about a God who lovingly accepts us. It is all about a God who restores a relationship with us. And it is about the obligation we have to play in that role as well. When I was probably around 8 or 9 years old, one of my friends was over at the house, and while my mother was off doing something else in the house, we went over to my father's bar. and I had seen him many a time make a bourbon and Coke, and so we decided we wanted to see what that was all about. And so we got out a Coke and we poured each other put Coke in a glass, and then I got the bottle of bourbon and opened up the bourbon and we poured bourbon in each of the glasses, and then we both took a sip of our glasses, and oh my goodness, it was terrible. Oh, it tasted awful. And so we just took the glasses and we poured them into the sink, and we left the glasses in the sink, and we left the bottle of bourbon wide open, and we ran out of the house and went outside to play in the yard, and we kind of forgot all about it. Well, a few minutes later, my mother drifted through the den. My dad's bar was kind of in the back in another little room, and she could smell the bourbon in there, and she stuck her head in there. There are 2 glasses. There's an open bottle of bourbon. It's only my mother and my friend and I in the house. She knows she hadn't been drinking, so she knows what is going on. And so she calls us back in, and she sits us down in the den, and she shows us what she's found. And she says, you want to tell me anything about this? And immediately we both confessed that we had made ourselves a Coke and bourbon at 8 years old. And she, I just think so wisely, didn't blow up and yell and scream whatever, but she simply said, well, how did you like it? And we both said, it was terrible. Oh, we tasted it. It was just awful. We just drank a little bit and then we poured it out. And she then said, well, I'm glad that you understand now that it tastes bad, and I don't want you to ever do that again. And she was pretty stern. And she also said, and you really ought to know that you are terrible at covering things up. As soon as I walked in there, I saw 2 glasses in the sink, the open bottle. You didn't even clean up after yourselves. You're terrible criminals. And that story, as you can tell, has stuck with me all my life. Now, she did not say, you've committed a crime, although we had. I mean, I guess legally we committed a crime. We were underage. But we also committed a crime against her and against my father, because I knew I was not supposed to be drinking at 8 years of age, and I was willfully disobeying a rule in the house. But she didn't say, now you're going to be punished. She lovingly accepted us. She decided that tasting the bourbon and discovering that it tasted bad to us, and then really being ridiculed a little bit for being terrible criminals, was probably punishment enough. We had already suffered enough. She wanted to make sure we never did it again, and she made sure that we understood we better not do it again, or the punishment might be a little more severe. But she felt like that was enough, and it was. And as you can tell, I can remember to this day that instant happening. Well, that is an example of someone offering loving acceptance and really restoring the relationship. She could have said, well, you've done this, I'll never trust you again, and our relationship is over, your friend can never come back. I mean, there's all kinds of things she could have done, but instead she allowed us to enter back into a relationship with us, and she justified us. She ended up putting everything right back the way it was. We had learned our lesson, and I have to admit, because of this incident, largely, I really did not drink again until I was of age. I was not one in high school who went out and drank, and I don't think, I really don't think I ever had a single drink until after I was over the age of 21, and it was all due to this. And that's another example of God's loving acceptance, how it works better than the penal justice system, where there are a whole bunch of repeat offenders. And it's not to say that we don't ever stop sinning, because that's where we're going next. God is one who lovingly accepts us through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And so we receive justification. Let's note first that we receive justification through all 3: life, death, and resurrection. Sometimes, as almost shorthand, we just say, well, Jesus died for us, and that's how we were justified and put right. But it's not just the death. It's also the life and the resurrection. And life is pretty important, the life of Jesus. If Jesus only came to die, the most efficient thing God could have done was have Jesus be born and then have Herod kill him when Herod slaughtered all of the rest of the innocents, and that would, Jesus' mission on earth would be over. But Jesus came to live among us as well, because living among us, Jesus loved us and taught us how to love. And then Jesus lays down his life willingly for us, not the way that a child gets killed as an innocent victim, but Jesus lays his life down willingly for us. Innocent, yes, but an unwilling victim, no. And then Jesus is raised again from the dead. And even in that resurrection, we see so much grace. Jesus could have been raised again from the dead and come back to wreak vengeance on all of those who had done harm to him. But instead, he is raised from the dead to offer God's loving acceptance to all. Well, we now get into regeneration. what is regeneration? Well, in part, regeneration is sort of the fact that after I had that experience drinking at age 8, I didn't drink again until I was of age, until it was legal. We would say, learned my lesson, and so I didn't commit that sin again. And in a sense, that is regeneration, because I didn't go back. But regeneration is actually much more than that, and it's much better than that. And it's not about our willpower. And I would really argue that even what I did by not drinking all that time, that wasn't really about my willpower, but my mother's love for me helped me to be able to not give in to the temptation of drinking at later dates. My mother changed me. It wasn't that I changed myself, and that is what regeneration is. So we read in 4:15. Let me mention verse 4:13, 4:14 do remind us that we do sin again, and God must continually forgive us, and we have to continue to come back to God for sinning. But then we do discover that when God forgives us and saves us, we maybe don't commit that sin again, or maybe we discover that we are able to be better people, not because of our willpower, but because of the love of God. And that's what regeneration is. So regeneration, 4:15 says, is God's renewal of believers and is solely of God's grace. Those who trust in the Lord Jesus are recreated or born again, renewed in spirit, and made new persons in Christ. Every now and again, when I ask somebody, hey, how you doing? They'll say, better than I deserve. I think that's a wonderful response. What I deserve is so much worse than what my life is. My life is so good. I am better than I deserve. I think if I were to ask you, are you a good person? Or hopefully if you would ask me, are you a good person? The answer would be, I'm better than I deserve. Because if I am a good person, it is because the grace of God. Regeneration is God's renewal of believers, and it is solely of God's grace. God actually gives us the ability to be better than we would be otherwise, than we could be otherwise. When David in Psalm 51 prays, create in me a clean heart, O Lord. That word create is the same word back in Genesis when God creates the whole world out of absolutely nothing. I can't create in myself a clean heart. God can create in me a clean heart. This past 4th of July long weekend, we had 32 people at our house as house guests for the weekend. We had trailers all over the farm, blowing electric circuits left and right with all the AC running and that kind of thing. But of the 32 people, I think 12 of them were children, and several of them were very, very young children under the age of 3. And they are not able to clean themselves. They're not able to bathe themselves particularly well. Their parents have to be in there with them and to bathe them. And let me tell you, when you got kids running around on the farm, they get dirty. And it rained several days in the afternoon, and they would go find the biggest mud puddle. There are other sources of dirt and filth, as you might imagine, on a horse farm, and the kids found it. And if the parents just told the kid, well, go in the bathroom and bathe yourself, the kid would likely make a bigger mess than if they had not gone in there at all. It takes the parent to do that. That's what regeneration is. That is God giving us a bath and cleaning us and doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And that means that we should not boast that we are better than other people, should not compare ourselves to other people, because the only reason that there's any good in me is because God has created in me a clean heart, and God continuously has to renew and recreate that clean heart in me, and I can't do it for myself, and you can't do it for yourself either. Well, finally we come to sanctification and our very quick tour of these three big theological words. And sanctification is the word that is used when the Catholic Church declares that someone is a saint, right? So-and-so has gone through sanctification process, and now they are a saint. And we often, when we use the word saint of that kind of person, we think of somebody who is perfect, and somebody whose we could never attain their level of sainthood. But in fact, the word saint really just means someone who does good works. When you think of Mother Teresa, who is now a saint, has been sanctified by the Catholic Church, we don't think of her as being perfect necessarily, but we do think of someone who did amazingly wonderful good works, and in that sense she's a saint. We use that word with each other as well. If you do something really kind for me, particularly if you go way out of the way for for me, I may say, you are being such a saint, thank you, you're such a saint to me. Well, I'm not saying that I think you're perfect, but I am saying that you have done good works. And so how appropriate it is that in 4.21 it says, sanctification is God's setting apart of believers as servants in the world. And what sanctification really does is it gives us a purpose. So I have everything that we have done up to now in the confession, and particularly today, I've been justified. God has set the relationship that I have with God back to where it should be. I have been regenerated. God has been able to bring good out of me. And God does all of this not just for my benefit, but for the benefit of the world, so that I might be sanctified, so that I might take what God has done in me and use it for the world, to be a servant as the world. Sanctification is God's setting apart of believers as servants in the world. And so as we consider the ways that we are called to be justified by God and to return again and again to justification, to be regenerated by God, and then for God to make us saints, to allow us to work with God as servants in the world, I want to share with you a song, or at least an edited song of a friend of mine, Kyle Matthews, called What in the World? What in the world are we saved for? And in this song you will see elements of everything that we have talked about today. And so let us end by prayerfully considering what Kyle Matthews has to say to us about justification, regeneration, and sanctification.
If we were not loved to love, if we were not touched to touch, if we were not led to lead, if we were not fed to feed, if you did not sacrifice so we could have new life, fuller and deeper than before, then Lord, what in the world have you saved us for? If we were not taught to teach, if we were not sought to seek, if we were not helped to help, if we were not told to tell, if you've not forgiven us, to let mercy live in us, so you could love through us once more, then Lord, what in the world have you saved us for? There's a reason we were brought to life. Lord, you made us for this place and time, and you showed the way for us to find our sacred purpose, our place in your design.